There's a subtle cruelty in the world that few are willing to admit, and even fewer can survive. It's the hostility that brilliance attracts. Not just rejection, not just envy, but something colder, more primal. A quiet, consistent resistance from the very society that claims to celebrate genius. But this is the dilemma Schopenhauer saw so clearly: why the truly brilliant are often not celebrated in their time, but erased, mocked, isolated. And it's not because they're wrong. It's because they see too much. They threaten the illusions we cling to. They confront mediocrity without apology. And in a world built on comfort and conformity, that kind of perception is treated not as a gift, but as a threat. Let's start with the premise Schopenhauer knew intimately: if you're truly original, if your thoughts pierce past convention, if your mind moves faster, deeper, or more honestly than the structures around you, you will be punished. Not always directly, sometimes through silence, sometimes through ridicule, sometimes through being misunderstood. And the reason is rooted in psychology, not just culture. Most people don't want truth. They want agreement. They want comfort. They want reinforcement of what they already believe. And when someone arrives who disrupts that, who questions the foundations, who refuses to flatter the collective ego, they are cast out. Because brilliance doesn't flatter people. It exposes them.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound insights.
Schopenhauer wrote with a certain bitterness about this. He was a man who saw the world not through rose-colored lenses, but through the raw, often brutal lens of philosophical realism. He understood that high intelligence is not a social advantage. It is a burden, a form of alienation. And that alienation grows in proportion to the depth of your insight. Why? Because the deeper you see, the less you can participate in illusions. The less you can tolerate small talk, empty rituals, social games. You start to feel like an outsider in conversations, gatherings, even relationships, not because you think you're better, but because you can't pretend like others can. And society punishes that refusal to pretend. Let me ask you something piercing. Have you ever dimmed your intelligence just to be accepted? Have you ever hidden your insights because you knew people wouldn't understand, or worse, would mock them? If you have, then you've already felt the pressure Schopenhauer predicted. The pressure to conform, the pressure to dilute, the pressure to make yourself smaller so others don't feel insecure. And here lies the silent tragedy of the brilliant. Not that they can't express themselves, but that even when they do, the world often refuses to listen. Because listening would require change, and most people fear change more than they fear ignorance. Schopenhauer believed that most people live in what he called the phenomenal world, the world of appearances, distractions, ego, and illusion. But the brilliant mind can't stay there. It pierces through to the noumenal world, the deeper reality behind the masks. And once you've seen that deeper truth, you can't go back. You can't pretend that success, fame, or even most relationships are what they claim to be. You see through the games, and that sight isolates you. Not as a punishment, but as a consequence of clarity. And here's where it gets even darker. Society doesn't just ignore brilliance, it weaponizes it. It uses the brilliance of a few to elevate its own myths, then discards the rest. It celebrates acceptable genius, the kind that creates profit, entertainment, or cultural reinforcement. but it suppresses the dangerous kind, the Schopenhauers, the Nietzsches, the ones who speak truths that unsettle the foundations. And what happens to those people? They're labeled difficult, arrogant, depressed, too intense. Their thoughts are dismissed as too much. Their questions are called negative. But what they are, in truth, is honest. And honesty, Schopenhauer argued, is the rarest and most rejected form of brilliance. Let me give you an example. Imagine a student who sees through the hypocrisy of the education system. They challenge the teacher, not to be rebellious, but because their mind genuinely works differently. What happens to that student? Are they nurtured? Rarely. More often they're scolded, isolated, pathologized. Now magnify that experience into adulthood. The brilliant thinker who sees through politics, media, corporate culture, are they welcomed? No, they're sidelined, because their brilliance is not convenient. It doesn't serve the machine, it disrupts it. And yet, Schopenhauer didn't believe this was a reason to despair. He believed it was a reason to detach, to stop seeking validation from a society that cannot appreciate what it refuses to understand. He saw solitude not as a punishment, but as a necessity for the brilliant. Because only in solitude can the mind breathe freely. Only in solitude can thought deepen without distortion. And so he offers a radical invitation: stop trying to be accepted. Start trying to be accurate. Stop trying to be liked. Start trying to be real. But here's the paradox: while society may hate the brilliant in the moment, it needs them in the long run. It needs the outsider to expose what insiders ignore. It needs the seer to point to the blind spots. Even if those truths aren't accepted now, they plant seeds. And those seeds, over time, grow into revolutions. So the brilliant are often not recognized in their lifetime, but they shape lifetimes to come. Schopenhauer himself was largely ignored during his prime. It was only after his death that the world began to realize the depth of what he saw. That's the fate of many who think deeply. You are unseen now, but your vision echoes beyond you. So I'll ask you this, and let it linger in your mind. Are you willing to be misunderstood today in order to be remembered tomorrow? Are you willing to walk alone now in order to walk in truth while others remain trapped in comfort and conformity? Because that is the real test of brilliance. Not just the ability to think deeply, but the courage to keep thinking when no one claps, when no one listens, when no one agrees. Schopenhauer didn't ask us to be optimistic. He asked us to be honest. And in a world drowning in noise, comfort, and illusion, honesty is the most radical act of all. The loneliness of genius, why isolation is the price of seeing too much. There is a kind of silence that doesn't feel peaceful, it feels like exile. It's the silence that follows after you've said something true in a room full of people who aren't ready to hear it. It's not just that they disagree. It's that they can't engage. Your insight lands like a foreign language. You watch their eyes glaze, their expressions tighten, or worse, they laugh. Not because what you said was wrong, but because it disrupted the rhythm of the collective illusion. This is the loneliness Schopenhauer understood better than almost anyone. The loneliness of the genius is not merely social, it's ontological. It's a gap between levels of perception. And the more clearly you see, the wider that gap becomes until eventually you realize You will alone not because you want to, but because no one else can follow where you've gone. Schopenhauer believed that isolation is not only inevitable for the truly brilliant, it's essential. Because when the mind rises above the ordinary begins to feel like a cage. Everyday conversations become unbearable. Small talk feels like self-betrayal. The social rituals that once seemed neutral now seem absurd. And you begin to crave something deeper in authenticity that can't be found in most human interactions. This craving for depth isolates you, because depth is rare, and those who live on the surface often fear those who dive. So you find yourself drifting to the margins, not as an act of arrogance, but as an act of necessity. You cannot breathe in the shallows. But this is where many fall into despair. Because we are social creatures, even the most independent minds long for resonance. And when it doesn't come, when you speak and no one echoes back, you begin to question yourself. Am I too much? Am I broken? Should I stop thinking this way? Should I fit in more? These questions are seductive. They offer the promise of belonging. But Schopenhauer would warn you, belonging bought at the cost of truth is not belonging, it is self-erasure. The loneliness you feel isn't a flaw. It's a sign that your mind has outgrown the room it was raised in. And while that growth hurts, it is sacred. Let me ask you something deep, and don't answer quickly. Would you rather be understood by the many for what you're not, or misunderstood by the few for what you are? That's the fundamental choice the brilliant must make. Because mass understanding is almost always offered on the condition that you dilute your truth. You must speak in palatable tones. You must simplify what is complex. You must entertain more than you challenge. But if you refuse, if you hold to your full perception, then you must prepare for solitude, because clarity is alienating. The more you see, the fewer people you can speak to without translating. Schopenhauer saw this as a kind of spiritual exile. But he didn't see it as tragedy. He saw it as liberation. Because in solitude, the brilliant mind is finally free from the noise of public opinion. There's no more need to posture, no more pressure to conform, and in that freedom, something miraculous happens. Thought deepens, insight sharpens, the soul expands. You begin to write, think, create not for applause, but for truth. And that truth becomes your companion, your anchor, your mirror. It doesn't replace human connection, but it transforms the kind of connection you seek. You no longer want agreement. You want resonance. You no longer chase popularity. You seek authenticity. And this is the crucial turning point. When the loneliness of genius is no longer a punishment, but a path. You begin to realize that isolation is not the absence of connection. It is the presence of integrity. It's the space where you stop performing and start becoming. Where you stop broadcasting and start listening to your own mind, your own soul, your own questions. And in this space you begin to create work that is not reactive, but revelatory. Work that doesn't just echo what's already been said, but reveals what others haven't yet dared to see. But make no mistake, this path has a cost. You will lose friends, you will lose comfort. You will often feel invisible in a world that celebrates the loud but ignores the wise. There will be days when your mind feels like both a gift and a curse. Days when you long to be normal, to not see so much, to not feel so deeply. But those days will pass, and what will remain is something stronger than comfort clarity. The clarity of knowing who you are, what you stand for, and why you cannot go back. Let me share something personal. Every time I've spoken a truth that made people uncomfortable, I felt a moment of fear. Would they leave? Would they mock me? Would I be alone again? And sometimes they did. But every time I chose truth over popularity, I gained something more powerful than approval. I gained self-respect. And that self-respect became the foundation for everything else. Because once you can sit alone in your truth without flinching, you become indestructible. So here's the final question of this part. Are you willing to endure the loneliness that comes with brilliance in order to protect the clarity that brilliance gives you? Because that's the deal. You can't have both. You can't see deeply and be universally liked. You can't question everything and still be invited to every table. But you can be real. You can be whole. You can be awake. And sometimes that's worth more than any applause. Schopenhauer didn't ask us to be hopeful. He asked us to be honest. And honesty, when practiced fully, will always lead you away from the crowd and into yourself. The war on depth, how modern culture destroys the value of original thought. We live in an age that claims to value intelligence, creativity, and originality, but if you look closely, you'll see that what society truly rewards is something else entirely. Not depth, but virality. Not truth, but agreement. Not insight, but speed. The philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer never lived to see TikTok, Twitter, or algorithmic dopamine loops, but he predicted them in spirit. He warned that the masses, driven not by reason but by instinct and imitation, would always resist anything that made them pause, reflect, or feel uncomfortable. And that's exactly what depth does. Depth slows you down. It disorients before it liberates. It challenges what you think you know. And in a culture addicted to distraction, that kind of challenge is treated not as valuable but as inconvenient. Schopenhauer believed that the mediocre mind does not fear intelligence, it hates it. Not because it understands it, but because it feels threatened by it. This is why, in today's world, the most brilliant thinkers often go unnoticed while the loudest voices dominate the room. Look around. Our culture elevates the fast and the flashy, the confident over the competent, the simple over the profound. And it's not just a coincidence, it's a system designed to reward immediacy and punish nuance, to amplify what confirms and suppress what confronts. And in that system, original thought becomes a liability. It doesn't scale well, it doesn't trend, it doesn't fit neatly into a caption or a sound bite. And because of that, it's ignored or worse, mocked. Let me ask you a question that might sting. When was the last time you encountered something so intellectually disruptive that it changed the way you viewed reality and you actually sat with it, rather than scrolling past it? That kind of experience is rare now. Not because such ideas don't exist, but because we've trained ourselves to avoid them. We've trained ourselves to seek comfort over clarity, stimulation over silence, opinion over observation. And the result? A society filled with noise but starved of meaning. A world where everyone has a platform, but few have anything real to say. And those who do are often drowned out by the very machinery that claims to celebrate them. Schopenhauer saw this long before the internet. He wrote that truth passes through 3 stages. First it is ridiculed, then violently opposed, and finally accepted as self-evident. The problem is, most original thinkers never live to see that final stage. They die in the first 2, not because they failed, but because society wasn't ready. And here's the tragedy: by the time society is ready, it has often forgotten the cost of that readiness. It forgets the loneliness, the rejection, the suffering of the thinker who carried that truth when no one else would. It forgets that innovation is not born in trending hashtags or viral debates. It's born in solitude, in contemplation, in depth. And depth, today, is treated as an obstacle to engagement. So what do we do? How do you preserve depth in a world that rewards the shallow? First, you must reclaim your attention. This is not a productivity hack, it's a philosophical rebellion. Because attention is not just what you look at. It's what you become. And if your mind is constantly fragmented, pulled in 1,000 directions, numbed by endless content, you will lose the ability to think deeply. And when you lose that ability, you stop being a thinker and start being a consumer. You stop creating and start reacting. You stop becoming original and start becoming predictable. And that's exactly what the system wants: minds that are easy to market to, easy to manipulate, easy to forget. Second, you must learn to endure being misunderstood. This is not optional. If you say something truly original, something that doesn't fit the current narrative, you will be misinterpreted. People will project their fears onto your words. They will twist your meaning. They will say you're too negative, too intense, too complicated. And you must learn to stand anyway, not out of arrogance, but out of allegiance to truth. Because if you dilute your ideas for the sake of palatability, you betray the very thing that makes them valuable. So let people misunderstand you. Let them mock you. Let them scroll past. Your job is not to be understood by everyone. Your job is to be faithful to insight. Third, you must build inner fortitude. Because depth is heavy, it doesn't come with applause. It comes with questions, with solitude, with emotional weight. But it also comes with something else, something no algorithm can replicate: meaning. Real meaning. The kind that nourishes your soul instead of stimulating your ego. The kind that gives you a reason to keep going, even when no one claps, even when your ideas feel too big for the room. That kind of meaning can't be found on the surface. It must be mined like gold from the depths of the earth. And only those willing to dig will ever find it. Let me ask you this: are you willing to think thoughts that make you uncomfortable? Are you willing to entertain ideas that the crowd rejects? Are you willing to slow down long enough to really see what this world is doing to your mind? Because if you are, then you are already part of the resistance. Not a resistance of politics or ideology, but a resistance of consciousness. A refusal to let your mind be molded by mediocrity. A refusal to let your brilliance be buried beneath the noise. Schopenhauer didn't write for the masses. He wrote for the few. The few who still believe that thought matters, and that truth is worth more than likes. That the mind, when cultivated deeply, becomes a weapon against illusion. And that weapon, if you learn how to wield it, can cut through every lie the world throws at you. So here is the final challenge of this video. Don't just consume this message. Live it. Protect your depth. Guard your originality. Refuse the seduction of the shallow. Because the world doesn't need more noise. It needs you not diluted, not distracted, but awake.